Welcome to Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. Welcome back, Otterites. This is episode 187. I am Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis.
So welcome to Studio R. We are kicking it in the atrium today. And as the first episode of the month, this is a combo episode.
Yes.
As you know, listeners, we're down to 2 episodes a month. And we decided to kind of smush our heroes and history and pop culture into kind of a single episode format for the second Friday
Basically,
of the month.
It's anything that's not Code of Honor.
Yep. And so this is a combo History Our Heroes.
Yes.
And
kind of long overdue, actually.
Yeah,
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
how we could not have done
Robert
this.
has been pushing for this for some time.
Yes, yeah. How we could have not done this over 2 plus 3 years and all that, and why this wasn't episode number 1. But it's George Washington.
Yes. The father of his country.
Right.
And ours.
Yeah, I consider him to be the most important foundational historic personage probably since Augustus.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
That's
wow.
definitely high praise.
Certainly people Napoleon has a huge impact, but a positive foundational greatness personage, for me, it's 2 millennia, it's Washington.
Yeah, very good. So in other words, you're basically telling all the kings of England and Europe and all those places to go pound sand.
Yeah, flipping them the bird.
Yeah. That's right, because they're not worth anything. Even, dare I say, Charlemagne, which we did an episode on not
just
long
last
ago.
month, yes.
Right.
That's right.
And in particular, for this reason, there are a lot of reasons, but in particular because he left the stage.
Yes, that's extremely important. I'm really glad you started with this idea of the most whether he is the most or if there's anybody else, he is certainly top 3.
Yeah,
Even if you want to start adding others into the discussion, not just because he left the stage, but Francis, you mentioned Charlemagne. Okay, yeah, he's certainly important to the history of Europe and the world.
Right.
But he did not do something that was new. He was recreating something that had already that had come and gone.
Right, yeah.
He brought in new stability.
Right, redefining it for at the time, his modern age. For him, yes.
Whereas Washington, he really was pivotal. He's one of the key players that created something totally unheard of, unseen.
Yeah.
And is still called the Great Experiment in Democracy.
Right. So we are using this Washington episode then to kick off a series about the most important revolution in human history, the American Revolution.
And the most successful.
Because it's been sustainable. Essentially, there is an unbroken line for 200 years of evolution, of course, but necessarily, it's the same thing they put in place.
Right.
And it's not just that Constitution, because the Constitution itself flowed from the Declaration and the principles that came. And we've talked a lot about their origins, philosophically speaking.
Yes. Well, that's an important thing, is that this time in history saw the confluence of...
Oh, that's a good word.
Yes.
Confluence. I love that. That's good. Confluence. It's perfect.
Saw the confluence of not just great thinkers of the Enlightenment, but men who were willing and able to put that into practice.
Yes, that's the key. The Constitution is this thing, but what does it really mean in real life?
Yes.
And Washington's the guy who gave that shape.
That's correct, because it could have been...
1A is leaving the stage, and 1B is, how do you really run a constitutional republic? We don't know.
Because it's never been done.
It's never been done. Washington does it, and it's still so hard to replicate. Even 10 years later, or less than 10 years later, the French completely fail.
Right. Well, we've
talked about Washington's example.
We've talked about this before.
Screw it up.
Is that the American Revolution is really the only successful revolution that I'm aware of.
It's the only middle class revolution.
And it's that's a great point.
Well, that's right.
It is the revolution of the mercantile class.
Yeah. And because it worked.
Yeah, and surprisingly enough,
well, it's because
led by the slaveholders. But yes, it is a.
But that's another key to Washington. He's walking that line between these intellectual planner class like Jefferson and the intellectual mercantile class like Hamilton.
Yes,
and he's managing to balance both of their interests. Because Jefferson really did have this idea of, well, we're just going to have this whole country is just going to be farmland. And it's going to be this bucolic plantation. And he really was, inside this Virginia bubble.
Yes.
Ironically,
even as a Virginian.
Exactly, because Washington is in the same bubble.
Yeah.
And that's he's able tribute to his genius. Yeah. He's recognizing, just because I live this way doesn't mean everybody else lives this way.
Right. He's able to see the things that Franklin and Hamilton see that, hey, we can be both. Well, and we have to be both.
It's somewhat urban versus rural in many respects.
Well, yes, and because I was just going to say
that line.
The difference between Jefferson, he is a man of letters. He's a man of learning. He is a cosmopolitan man in many ways. He was sent to France. It's not like he only spent time in Virginia.
Yeah.
But he was part of the upper crust in Virginia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when he goes to France, he is still part of that upper crust. He did not do like Washington. He was not in the military. He did not spend time with real people in that sense. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know how much of Jefferson's time would have been spent like that in similar situations.
Very interesting thing.
But I think that's important.
Yeah,
I think it's very interesting because Washington had experience with all levels of people, particularly during his generalship.
Yes,
because even before,
yeah,
because he's
the
a surveyor.
Indian War.
French Indian War. That's correct.
He's a traveler and a surveyor, same as Franklin. That's why Franklin becomes this guy that understands. I can't just be a Philadelphian. I can't just be a Pennsylvanian. I have to be an American. Washington's the same way. I can't just be a Virginian. I have to be an American. And they see
there's
this
an irony for you
tying
because
these things together.
I think if Washington were alive in 1861, he'd have been a Unionist.
Oh yeah.
I think if Jefferson were alive in 1861, he would have been a Confederate.
He'd have been a secessionist.
Yeah. I really think that's the case.
It's there. You have these two,
which is very ironic when you consider
two poles opposing each other that are embedded in our cultural understanding, political understanding from this time. 2-3 generations before the opposition becomes so acute that it explodes.
Yeah.
Yes, and yes, Washington was a slave owner. We get that. It is the great national sin. But it is certainly no worse than the great national sin of many countries.
But
he was also...
Oh, please no, go ahead.
I was going to say...
I'm cutting you off.
But he was also... He walked the line, I think, as best as he could, in the sense that, yes, he freed the slaves in his will. Certain number upon his death and the rest upon his wife's death, although she freed them early.
Yeah.
He helped to enact laws that would limit slavery.
Yeah.
So... Yes. Like Jefferson, I think he saw that, this really is not a sustainable thing. But unlike Jefferson, I think he was more willing to actually do something about it.
Yeah. Again, Washington, that genius of, he saw the contradiction of what they were talking about of all men are created equal, yet not these men because they don't look like us.
Yep.
And he hated that, but he also understood the only way I can cobble this together is to be okay with this compromise we built into the document and hoping we can fix it later.
Well, went back to his experience in 1776.
Yes,
with the Declaration, because we weren't going to sign on, and that's when he realized this is an immovable object in our way, and we can't have this argument.
There's no way to survive as 2 or 3 separate entities all rebelling from Britain. We have to be one thing. Like Franklin's talking about. We've got to be one thing.
Yeah, and he recognized that you simply have to compromise on this, which is kind of part of the genius of the system that he left us.
It's the worst compromise, to
paraphrase for all the others.
Chesterton, except for all the others.
Yeah, because all the others, there was no other way to compromise.
Yeah.
And it would have meant ruin. It would have meant destruction.
Well, the only other option, and you can make the moral argument that the only other option, realistically, was the moral. That it is the only moral option. Was what we don't have a rebellion.
Well, that's right.
Have a revolution. We stay part of.
We cede all the authority for not only ourselves but those in servitude to a foreign crown.
Well, I wouldn't say all the authority, but we remain a vassal of the king.
Yeah, ultimately we cede every authority in the end to him.
Well, I think every authority in the end, I think that's overstated.
To Parliament.
But
because that's the gripe.
Well,
we're subject to Parliament, but we have no representation in Parliament.
Yes, but we had way more autonomy here.
Yeah.
Practically speaking,
than you guys are making it sound, is what I mean.
Oh, there's truth to that. Yeah. Just by distance alone.
The point is, the whole taxation without representation was the part that America was,
that bristled.
The colony. Yeah, because if they were producing a fair amount of coin for the king, and they were not getting a say in anything, and that's all they wanted. If the king had said, you know what, you're right, you guys get X number of seats in the House of Commons, and maybe, just maybe, a Washington, a Jefferson, whoever gets to be a lord, then maybe that doesn't happen. So what happens then? Well, England eventually gets rid of their slaves, so maybe they get rid of them here. Or you can make the argument that there's enough money influence here that says, you know what, maybe we ought to rethink this whole getting rid of the slaves thing. It's an interesting what if, but one can make the argument that that's the only moral choice.
I think you're onto something there. The possibility could have been, and it wouldn't have taken that much for Parliament to bend this way.
Right? It almost
because the idea of the taxation was, well, we just fought a war, protecting you guys on your continent. You got to pony up for that,
which is not entirely unfair.
Right? It was not entirely an unfair thing. It's just without the representation, the colonists felt slighted. But you're right. What if Franklin gets invited to take a seat and represent? He is the member of Parliament for Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. If they had treated the colonies as part of Britain and started inviting, and it wouldn't have taken. You're right.
Well, yeah, but
3 guys.
But you set a precedent, which of course, it's hard to see the future at this point here. But the British Empire having imperial colonial representatives,
right? They would have had to have eventually done it for everybody,
and it becomes unwieldy.
Maybe not, because you have to remember, the 13 colonies were the only colonies that Great Britain ever had that were populated
exclusively by their own people.
By their own people, yes. Yeah. We were. Obviously, there were Frenchmen, Italians, and Germans, and others that were on the continent. But the vast majority of people here were descended from England and the Irish and the Scots.
From English and Scots that were dissenters. So you automatically have a built-in, we already dissented once just by coming here because of whatever.
Right.
So we're going to do it again. But I just think that's an interesting what if. Well, if they had bent a little bit, invited 2 or 3 guys and said, okay, you represent the colonies in Parliament.
Well,
would that have tamped down the revolutionary fervor? And then we're Canada.
I was going to say, we're Canada then.
We're Canada.
That's ultimately where the
stands. We could have been Canada, and you know what kind of weather they have.
Well, Scotland is the same.
So they can stick that round bacon.
That's right. They take that round bacon and stick it right up their rear ends, because that is not bacon. That's ham.
That's ham. So I like that ham on my pizza. But if you just call it ham, it's a round ham.
It's a round ham.
It's not bacon.
But the reason I bring that up, is to because I think it's important we address that elephant in the room about, well, was he truly a great man because he subscribed to a system that was indefensible?
Yeah.
Morally indefensible.
Yeah.
Well, a portion of it was
no, the institution of slavery
is... Oh, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah,
I thought you were talking about the larger...
No, the institution of slavery is entirely
that's
indefensible.
correct. Yes, that's right.
But he saw that was the only way to make it work, even though he hated it. He did want to... abolition's not even a word yet.
Right.
Really. But, he did not... He wanted to free his slaves. But he was also concerned, too, about... Well, how do you free a slave in Virginia? What are they going to do? At least if they're here, they're protected. And I can treat them, and I can, we can make some kind of an accommodation. And I can say, oh, well, yeah, they're my slaves. And that makes everybody leave them alone.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because it's not going to do
It's a rather paternalistic approach.
It is. It is. But
yeah.
it's the only thing they could conceive of, too.
Yeah, because it is a problem, as we saw after the Civil War. What happens to all of the freedmen?
Right.
So if they stayed in the South, they were just oppressed.
Yeah.
It was just called a different thing.
You can't just, say, okay, well, you guys are all free, go do something.
Right, what are they going to
do? As soon as they leave the plantation, they're going to get snatched up again and put right back into slavery.
Yep.
Being able to say, well, but General Washington freed us. Sure he did.
Yeah. Well, generally, though, when somebody was freed, they were given some kind of paper that said, I'm a freedman. But
rep.
Yeah, that's...
They're just,
And later, some states actually passed laws that didn't matter if you were free.
Yeah.
If you show up in my state, you are a slave, and anybody can take you.
And anybody can grab you and claim you as a slave. So even as he moved about later, go to New York as president and go to Philadelphia and all this stuff, it was still even dicey there.
Yeah.
Because, the people did do it. That was part of what you could do is, if you wanted to free a slave, you could travel to New York with your slave.
And just don't bring them home.
And then they were free. But even that's tricky because they could still move around, or somebody could still grab them, or because people from Virginia would go north and go looking for people and say, well, you're an escaped slave. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. And how
let's
did you
face
prove
it?
You had no legal rights anyway.
And let's face it, the authorities in New York, they couldn't give a damn.
Yeah.
So
it's very, very tricky. Thing.
It is. And that's why I think that the revisionist look at people like Jefferson and Washington is so damaging to understanding what they did. The monumental impact.
Yeah. It's an enormous hurdle to figure out what to do with your slaves. it's easy to sit here now and go, well, you should have freed them.
Absolutely.
Of course we feel that way. And yes, we feel it's horrible. But, paternalism factors into it. They wanted to protect them. And
some wanted to protect them. Some wanted to just keep their damn slaves.
Well, that's a lot.
And that's part of the problem. And, Jefferson, I think, is probably the biggest hypocrite of them all.
Yes. Jefferson's practically Orwellian in his thinking about things.
Yes. We've talked about this before on the show. We've come to realize that Jefferson is nowhere near the hero.
The marble man, as they say.
Yes, that he is painted to be.
Correct.
Never mind. I think it's great that, things that have come to light, that the way he treated his slaves, the way he treated Sally Hemings, all of these things. On the other hand, I don't want it to diminish the contributions that he made to the founding of the country. And I want to make sure that, certainly I don't worry about that in our discussion, but I want listeners also to understand you can't do that with these guys entirely. Yes, you can acknowledge the bad stuff, and absolutely you should, but also acknowledge the good stuff and realize the limits of the time. It's very easy to project back and say, well, yeah, he was really a horrible man, should burn in hell for X, Y, and Z. But, remediating X, Y, and Z may not have been possible. Yeah.
And the boulder was so large because it was societal and systemic.
Yes.
It required, as we saw in history, a war to essentially overturn
England
that.
didn't even end the slave trade to England until... What, the
1830s?
30s,
yeah,
that's what I thought, the 1830s.
Yeah, and I'll give a plug for one of the best movies I've seen in recent years, Amazing Grace, with Ian Griffith, as William Wilberforce, who was able to tap into an understanding, a national consciousness in England of this is wrong and it needs to be abolished. But ironically, of course, they didn't have the vested interests that were landed to the extent that the American South colonies were.
Well, that's because
slavery was a little arm's length.
That's exactly
it. At arm's length. I mean, there were slaves. They dealt in slave trade.
Well, that's correct.
But they did not, because they had poor white people working their land.
That's correct. It's a holdover from feudalism and serfdom.
Yes.
They still had this, even though the quality of living for those individuals has risen at home.
Oh, certainly. The white people working the land in England were far better off than slaves.
Well, yeah, exactly.
I'm not equating them at all.
Yeah, we don't want to do that.
But yes, it was less. It was, in a way, it was a much more. They were able to be much more idealistic.
That's correct. They could afford to be
because they could afford to be.
It was,
and that's a horrible thing to have to admit.
The West Indies. It was over there,
which was divestible. You know, they were at the time.
Well, yes, but they did not really divest of that for quite some time.
That's correct. That's right.
It's a great picture of. What was it? I think it was a picture of an empty room. Everything in the museum of the National Museum of Great Britain, or whatever it's called.
British History Museum, or whatever it's called.
Came from Britain, and it's an empty room.
Yeah.
So they're certainly not.
Why are there pyramids in Egypt? Because they're too big for Britain to take home.
Exactly.
Anyway, all right. So I think we've addressed.
I'm kind of glad that you went there, because it's been an issue on my mind of recent years, because we as Anglo descendants have a tendency to anoint our ancestral home in many ways that is probably not deserved in many ways.
Oh, sure.
And it's only as we've aged and as we've come to understand one of the great criticisms of Britain by Germany in particular was this colonialism of them, even though they participated. But they were late, Johnny. The only reason they did it, so they say, is because you're doing it already. In order for us to keep pace, we have to do this. Yeah. They blame the British and the British mentality of colonialism on the British.
Yes,
saying, you're doing this,
and that's a fair point, because the Brits were so good at it. Having such a vast sea power.
That enabled a lot.
Germany was not a sea power because they couldn't. They were bottled up,
right?
In the Baltic where they were, because you couldn't get past Britain,
right? And they wanted to be seen as equals on the world stage. That's not a bad thing to think about and to wish for and to work for. And they were very good in many ways at certain things. And ultimately, you can make the argument, perhaps. Take away the propaganda of the First World War in particular, that this is two enormous powers, say three with France, but they were kind of allied with Britain in many ways, that are deciding, no, we're not going to take this anymore.
Yeah, you can make that argument.
And it's not as simple as
they're
the greedy Huns that are going to eat your children.
Oh yes, and that is it. We've often said this. Germany got the rawest deal.
That's correct. They are not as, unfortunately, Nazism colors. It's a filter through which we look backwards, and you can't avoid that. That's a different animal entirely.
We tend to think that because they were the bad guys in World War II, that they had to be the bad guys in World War I.
Yeah. Right.
And in the sense that, yes, they were our foes. Yes, they were the bad guys in that sense.
Yes.
But they did not start the war.
No.
Yet they got the blame for it.
That's
because
correct.
they were the bulk of the Central Powers.
Yeah. And
this is way off topic.
Captain's prerogative.
Yes.
I'm gonna cut off our discussion about that part and get back to Washington, because I think we did effectively address the elephant in the room as a Virginian. He held slaves
as best as it can be.
Yeah. But he did want to move away from slavery. He wanted to move the country away from slavery. Here's 3 or 4 little pieces about Washington that I think makes him, again, that most important personage in Western history.
The true marble man.
Yeah, the true guy. Not necessarily the greatest military leader of all time, but he had success as a military leader.
Well, when you're fighting Great Britain, that's a big hill to climb.
Yeah.
So, and he really had to learn army level
tactics and strategy. Never really been that much of it's not like he went to Sandhurst or military academy in Britain or anything.
Right.
But he learned it. He picked it up. He understood how to command at small levels and at big levels. And he knew how to inspire his army.
Yes. Very important.
And he also knew, too, beyond the inspiration, they got to have food. They got to have shoes.
Well, he was a great tactician as well as a strategist.
Right.
Yes. Which is something many other generals, they may have been good at one or the other, but rarely both.
Yeah. Well, I think that oddly enough, being a plantation owner actually helped in that respect.
Oh, yeah.
Because he had a much greater sense of, I have a crap ton of people here that I've got to figure out how to feed, clothe, and house, and make sure it all runs smoothly. Now, obviously, it's not exactly the same situation.
Yeah.
But, it's a realization that many others would not be able to make.
His experience, not only as a military person, surveyor, person who was out on the frontier, but most of the plantation guys were tinkerers, too.
Yes.
Him especially, as he wasn't just, well, you slaves go plant stuff, and now you slaves go get stuff. He really took the notion of this plantation as, I can make it almost its own city. I can manufacture on a small scale, at least.
Right.
I can experiment. I can grow different crops. I can produce all these things.
He's
a brewer and a distiller.
He's responsible for a good number of hybrid species, plant species.
Yeah. So he's using that experience and translating it into the military.
Yeah.
Something else he was really, really good at is recognizing talent.
Oh, yes.
Regardless of the person's background.
Correct.
When you look at somebody like Hamilton, illegitimate, lived in the West Indies, a lot of people would have looked at him as a nobody.
Well, in England, he never would have risen to anything.
Anything. At all.
Yeah.
But Washington saw ability in Hamilton.
Correct.
He saw ability in Nathaniel Greene.
Henry Knox.
Henry Knox
is a great one, that's right.
Yes, Henry Knox.
One of my favorite lines from the Jeff Daniels movie is when he says to Knox, "When this army is starving, how can you be so fat?"
That's right. And then later he says to him, "Move your fat ass, Henry," as he sits beside him in the boats to go across.
Sorry, I had to. That's one of my favorite ones.
But yeah, it's one of. I'm glad we mentioned that because I don't want to lose the fact that there are really good portrayals of Washington.
Yes, Daniels was excellent.
And that might be the top. That might be the top. Barry Bostwick did a fantastic.
Yes, he did. Yes,
for the 2 miniseries they did.
But I think Daniels is better.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he was younger. He showed himself to be younger. He was a little bit portlier too, which I think felt more like Washington in many ways. And that's just image, though. It was Daniels was very good at that reductionist moment of where they took that
it's very human.
Very much so. Yes, right. The other was a little bit lofty, and that was not Bostwick's fault. That was the way it was written. It was meant to be a Washington memorial, whereas this is very tactical, and this is again the crossing is a great one.
Right. And when you think about all the abilities that we're talking, to move from being a military man to someone who shepherded the Constitution to someone who saw talent in others, regardless of their background, because that was really foreign then. It was the idea. Even here was, well, you come from a good family, you must be okay.
Well, yeah, that's
he did some of that.
It's a very British attitude.
Yeah, he was able to put that aside.
But it's still a very common attitude.
It is. It goes back to the aristocracy in many respects.
Well, we tend to judge. Yeah, it's not just an aristocracy thing. I think it's gone beyond that. We'll say it nowadays about people. You look at people who your son's going to date. The girl, you think, oh well, she comes from a good family. Or the sons that are going to date, or that are going to date your daughter. You want to make sure that he comes from a good family. He's brought up right to respect women. All those kinds of things.
Sure.
So there's very much.
It's easy to
where you come from is very important.
Yeah, and it was even more so then.
And then it was even more so. Yes.
It was institutionalized in many respects.
Yes.
But he,
yes, you had several things.
Take that, and then, wow, he's not done. He was able to then understand, without a model, really, since Cincinnatus, there was nobody to build from. How do you be the first president of a republic? because people offer, well, we'll call you king. No,
I didn't want that.
Or okay, well, it'll be hereditary. No. He was able to understand that the system we built is a wheeling and dealing style system, and there's nothing wrong with that. Right. I can go to Congress and I can get part of what I want, and they can get part of what they want, and everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And we can move ahead as long as we view each other as Americans, as a single nation.
Yeah, and that's really important, that how we view ourselves. It doesn't come across in a lot of the biopics, the movies, the literature, or anything like that. But I think you're right that it is I think almost all the founding fathers had a common view of this, because otherwise these 13 colonies, which were for all intents and purposes separate countries.
Oh yes, and very competitive.
At each
other's throats.
And not always had the same interests.
Right. Virginia did not have the same interests as New York.
Right.
By any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. So it's really a leap of imagination to think that all these 13 places that are so different, there's no way to survive unless we're together. Yeah. He really felt that. Franklin felt that. They really visionary in that sense, and at the same time as being visionary, very practical as well.
Yes.
Well, yes, because the system breaks down if it doesn't have the checks and balances. I think is probably the vision.
I think that's the most genius.
It's the genius. Yeah. That's exactly right. That's where the vision comes in, because otherwise, without that, it's unsustainable, and sustainability was the goal. And Washington recognized that, and even the little things, the 2 terms. I mean, that was unviolable for a long, long time. Even though everybody said we're going to violate it, none of them did.
Nobody really did.
Yeah,
the very few that attempted it were, they failed.
Until Franklin Roosevelt, but that was a completely different world.
Yeah. It was. If they had not been in the middle of a war, following a Great Depression, I don't think that would have worked. Yeah. So that was an extremely different time and era in that respect, and now of course it's the law. You can only have 2 or 2.5 if you
right.
Yeah. And just the idea of the Constitution authorizes me to have these government departments. How do I actually do that?
Right.
And turning that into a cabinet, and the Constitution authorizes me as president to do X, Y, and Z. Well, what does that really mean? And being able to stay within those boundaries while at the same time asserting an executive authority to move the country forward was this incredible balance that he took.
Well, to be fair, I think that
he was the only one talented enough to do it.
Oh, absolutely.
Adams failed.
Yes,
that's right. Well, Jefferson essentially had to remake it.
Well, and Jefferson moved to basically taking Washington's position on everything.
Yes.
After 8 years of criticizing the second term of Washington and Adams' term as these guys are tyrants and they're monarchists, and
he goes out and spends $15 million and more than doubles the size of the country.
And then once he's actually in the office, it's like, oh shit!
I guess this is the way.
This is the way you have to do it. And basically, essentially takes all the things that Washington had done and established and went on with them.
Yeah. So
and paid it forward, too, because his successors would ultimately...
Yes. To be fair...
Variations on a thing.
Yeah. So, to be fair, I think Washington did have a model. It's not an exact model.
Okay, good.
All right? Because England, well, yes, it's a monarchy. It's a constitutional monarchy.
That is correct. We lose sight of that so often. Yes.
And so... It is... Our system is not entirely unlike the British in the sense that, Congress is a decent analogy to Parliament.
Yes.
We do have an elected head of state. Granted, the true head of state is the monarch, but the day-to-day head of state is the prime minister.
Right. But there is the idea of separating the two.
Yes, that is
not the parliamentary system. The parliamentary system is you smush the executive into the legislative.
Right. But I mean, But it's still a model, though.
Yeah.
You know, there is still an elected guy who is the leader.
They start with that basic formula, and then they recognize, here's the flaws, fix this, fix this, fix this, fix this. For example, you can't just simply call for a vote and just say, everybody's out.
Well,
it's
part of this is
structure.
practicality. I don't know how true this is, but my guess is at least some of the thinking in that is geographically we are too large.
And that's a lot of it.
To allow a parliamentary system to work. Because if you call for a vote of no confidence, it's going to take 3 months to get everybody together to actually have a vote and figure. So, you know, that's one of the things we also forget is that Congress was part-time.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, at one point. It was not a full-time, it was never intended to be a full-time
And Washington took advantage of that.
Yes. It was an imperial presidency in the truest sense of the word because it was the first one. Of course it was an imperial presidency.
Well, this is not unheard of. He's looking back into the English history on this very true because many monarchs would function without Parliament for a period of time because
Charles II was famous for dismissing Parliament.
Exactly, it was their own form of check and balance, which was weighted more in the favor of the executive versus legislative.
There's also this piece of this was an era when you revisited the classical world.
That's right.
And the model is Rome. The original Roman Republic.
The Roman Senate, that's correct.
Is what they, the Senate and this idea of, dictator did not have the same meaning that it has now.
Right.
You know, dictator was somebody...
Well, probably by then it did in the 1700s.
But you go back and say, they elected this, or made the Senate, made this guy dictator for a certain period of time.
And gave him all the authority.
That's all it means.
That's all it means.
This large amount of executive authority. Yeah. And so that's what they were doing. They were
it's like when Palpatine takes over the Galactic Senate, he's really just trying to be a Roman dictator.
Right. Well, he turns into Augustus, of course, who says,
in the worst sense of the word,
we're not going to use you at all, guys. I've got it, and we're doing it my way. And that's where the entire concept of that.
All right, so let's pause for a moment.
Yes,
that's a good pause spot.
Yeah.
Because I want to do bourbon break, and then I want to talk about two particular instances that I think demonstrate Washington's uniqueness and his strengths.
I know one of them, and I'm curious about the second one. Okay.
So, do we want to keep what those are secret, or do you...
I'm going to talk about those after.
Because I have an idea of one, but that may not be the same as.
It will be interesting to see.
You'll be able to pick up on both.
I was going to say we probably know them, but I'm almost positive of one because we've mentioned one of them many times.
Yes. So I want to do those. I want to do the bourbon break and mention some books that I pulled off of my shelf about Washington. I'm sure you guys have some other ones.
Mm-hmm. There's a legion of books written about the man.
But I want to compliment Robert on his setup here at the atrium today because I'm thrilled with the giant tennis ball-sized ice cubes that we used in our bourbon today. Awesome!
This is totally new subject. Yes, it's mostly melted now.
But we poured our bourbon quite some time ago in preparation. But then we kept talking about other stuff. I had to pour my second bourbon to start this episode in order to have some for the break.
Well, I poured heavy on the early side, so I've still got some. And
there's too, but I was nipping at it because I don't have to drive.
That's true. Fantastic choices this time here. I think Martin and I are both drinking the same thing.
Yes. Francis and I grabbed the Old Forester 100.
Right, that's the signature.
Right, which Old Forester has become my thing these days. It really has.
I love this one for a lot of reasons. It's not what I poured. I poured the Russell's Reserve. I opened up the bottle that the eldest Spawn gave me for Christmas. And, of course, we had it at the Fraser most recently.
We did, yes, exactly.
And, of course, and Francis assures me we've had it on the show before, even though I don't remember it.
Right.
Yeah.
But this Old Forester I love for a lot of reasons. Even though I'm not drinking, I want to talk about it. Part of it is it's great value. It's not a hugely high-end price-wise, but it's got just a great amount of flavor and all of that. And it's a bottle that has a freaking screw top.
Yeah.
So, most people who are snobs about their bourbon, which we are,
at times,
yes, we can be bourbon snobs, will look at this bottle and think, oh, that's a screw top. We're going to bypass that. And I think this is an excellent example of why you cannot judge a bourbon by that.
That's great.
Yes, all the very best ones tend to have as a cork. I admit that. But this, I consider... I don't know why they don't put a cork in this one. I think they should. Anyways, I have the Russell's Reserve. I think this is an excellent bourbon. It's 10 years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Give me some tasting notes. Your palate's getting there.
Oh, yes, it is. Yes.
So I want to hear some Robert tasting notes on Russell Reserve 10 year.
So, this is one that has, as I like to call it, an explosion of flavor on the tongue and in the mouth. Obviously, we're all having it on the rocks. Or technically rock. Because it's just
one big old honking ice rock.
Yes. As my mother-in-law mentioned, so your balls are in the freezer? Yes, the ice balls are in the freezer.
Uh-huh.
And, there's a very much a caramel, I think, to it.
I love that it's almost like a salted caramel flavor.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Both of these have that. Their mash bills are similar. We looked up the mash bills.
Yes, they are.
No wheat in the mash bills.
No wheat, a little bit of rye.
Yeah.
So you get that bit of a dryness, kind of almost a peppery.
Yeah.
There's
kind of a flavor.
Tiny bit of pepper to it.
That kind of hangs around in the mouth afterwards.
Yeah.
It's not too powerful, which is one of the reasons why I like it.
What's your proof on that? I didn't know.
94, I think.
Okay, yeah. So yes, you're not heavy.
Yeah, this one is Oh no, this is 90.
90. Okay, yeah, it's
94.
Yeah, very reasonable.
So yeah, it's to me this is a standard proof for a really good bottle is a 90. If you get an 80, that's a very rare. That's probably not a very long aged bourbon. I think
you get some 84s out there. I think.
Yeah, but it's 86s. But anyways, the flavor is almost entirely in the mouth. You get some warmth eventually when you get it to your stomach. But this is very much the Kentucky Kiss.
Yeah.
It's very much a Kentucky Kiss.
So again, with a similar mash bill, I think the Old Forester had a touch more rye, 5 or 6% more,
something like that.
Yeah. I think we looked up the Russell Reserve was only 12%. So I think they're similar mash bills, probably similar flavors. It's been a while since I've had the Russell Reserve, but the Old Forester 100 is again that salted caramel, a touch of cinnamon, even.
Yeah.
Without a ton of pepper and just a little dry, and then some oak on the finish.
Agreed. Good. Yeah, it's one of those that is very smooth. It's kind of like a all over bourbon. It's not one that it doesn't hit you like the Russell's Reserve and some others that smack your tongue or smack the top of your mouth or smack the esophagus.
Well, at least for me, I tend to get it is somewhat subjective.
And this is also, that's a lot of water that we added. That is more water than perhaps we would have used otherwise.
Yes, but it takes longer to melt.
That is correct. So by the time I'm getting to it now, it's way mellowed down. Way
back. Yes. Even initially, I thought it was still mellow, sweet, caramel, nice finish.
Yeah.
Beginners, don't be afraid of it.
Oh, right.
So shout out to our bourbon buddy from the Fraser, Spraga from NYC. She was a kind of a bourbon beginner. Grab yourself some Old Forester 100 proof and give it a go. Yeah, because it's very mellow even without being wheated. We know now wheat in the mash bill will mellow these out. Yes. This one's very mellow.
I think the rye helps enhance the oakiness, the char.
Yes.
Because I think we call it peppery.
Yeah.
And in some cases, pepper is part of the mash, but I don't think that's the case here. But that char, I think, with the Russell's Reserve, is kind of that aftertaste. Not aftertaste, but just that lingering bit, the finish.
Yeah.
And, which is fine.
Yeah.
It's very nice.
So, very good bourbon break, fellas, and I included a shout-out to Sprague. I was hoping she would have listened to a couple of episodes and sent us an email.
Yes, she hasn't. I haven't seen anything yet.
So, Snakes and Otters Podcast at gmail.com if you pick up on this episode, and shoot us an email about
It's a long email, but hey, it's worth it.
Or, Robert at snakesandotters.com, Martin at snakesandotters.com, Francis at snakesandotters.com.
That's the easiest way to do it.
Give us a shout. So, I just grabbed 3 of my Washington books off my shelf. Rediscovering George Washington, Founding Father, Richard Brookhiser, always a good biographer.
Yep.
Harlow Giles Unger, Mr. President, George Washington, and the making of the nation's highest office. So this focuses on
presidential.
The decisions he makes as president and what does being president mean? What does having a cabinet mean? What do I have these people actually do? So a lot of this is, his interactions with Hamilton as Treasury Secretary, interactions with Jefferson as Secretary of State, and so on. And then, of course, a big dog daddy, Ron Chernow's Washington.
You can't beat Chernow as a biographer.
Incredible. It's the whole length of his life.
Right.
Relationships with Hamilton, Martha, everybody.
Yeah, it's probably the most comprehensive modern biography of him. Of course, every generation or so, there have been new ones, and some of the older ones are good, but we keep reimagining him every few decades or so.
I like the term representing.
Yeah, it's
because reimagining can be dangerous, but sometimes that's also the case.
We come at it from a different. He's so much of a diamond.
Well, you have
with different aspects and different facets.
You have to have biographers that will do this every generation or two, especially for large stage characters like a Washington, because you have to understand him not just in terms of his own time, but how can we in the 21st century make sense of that
and still take. And I think worthy of emulation and inspiration.
Yes.
How do you get there in a modern world?
Yeah, I didn't bring the books up from my library downstairs.
Neither did I. Didn't bring mine with me either.
But I always love Joseph Ellis. He is one of the premier Revolution writers.
Yeah.
He has a book called His Excellency, which is about him. There's one that he touches on the four of the founding fathers, which is really good. Also want to give a shout out to the author of 1776,
David McCulloch.
David McCulloch, thank you.
The late David McCulloch. Yes.
Yes.
We did not. I don't know that we toasted him.
Yes, we did.
We did. We may have. Yeah.
There have been so many.
That's right.
That have passed over the last several months. It's impossible to remember all of them because obviously our interests are
all
very
boomers. So
true.
It's time. Yeah. The boomers' clocks are up pretty much.
Pretty much, yeah.
He says that with snark in his.
Yes. Well, that's because we're not there yet.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Somebody be saying, "Yeah, those Generation Xers, they're gone."
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah.
But one of the things I want to point out about David McCulloch, though, is he does a great job in 1776, and spends a lot of time with Washington's army in that year.
Yeah. And again, there's the relationship with like a Henry Knox or Greene and Hamilton. All these guys.
1776 really is a pivotal year for the country. It's not just because the Declaration was written and sent off to England then.
Yeah.
That's not, as a matter of fact, that's probably not even the main reason.
Well, Trenton in particular.
You can say that's a 76, early 70, because the Trenton thing is not just Trenton. Yeah. It's actually...
it begins there.
It goes into early January. And that's the other one that I want to talk about. Frayling, I think it is. I can't remember his first name.
Yes.
It does a book called Washington's Crossing.
Yes.
That is a phenomenal book. It's almost as thick as that Chernow book, but it's entirely about crossing the Delaware and raiding the British.
The winter 76-77 campaign.
Yeah. Right. And that's just a few weeks.
That's exactly right. But it changed everything.
It did.
Which in many respects, I love that and I hate that too, because in so much of Washington, if you want to understand him, you can put him into those few months and get your arms around it. I get that. I love that. The Crossing, the movie, was a very good encapsulation of that. But you miss so much of the Revolutionary War, Washington.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Monmouth, in particular, should be his greatest achievement. It should be considered that. And yet, because he's taking on the British toe to toe, in equal measure, and
from a military perspective, yes, I would agree. But I think the 76. The December-January campaign, I think it's far more important.
Oh, it is. There's no question as to that.
Far more important.
It is, because it changed everything.
Well, it's not so much that it changed everything, because it did.
Yeah.
Because it was a brilliant campaign, to set the stage.
Yeah.
The enlistments of the vast majority of his army are about to be up at the end of the year. And when that happens, they're free to go home. It's not like the draft today, So
and they would probably do so because they have got their butts kicked, and they're one step away from literally Howes across the river, just waiting to come and beat the snot out of them. They're done.
Yes, it's winter. People don't campaign that often in winter back then because it's just too damn cold.
It's miserable.
You're walking everywhere.
Well, you're talking New Jersey. I mean, come on, it's cold up there in December.
Washington's plan is he needs something bold. He needs to do something to keep the army not only together in the terms of being able to stay, because, as you said, with the British just across the river.
Yeah, they're waiting
they're waiting to come over and kick their asses. So he needs something to mitigate that. He needs something to inspire the men to stay. He also needs to be able to feed them until they are free to go.
And as the genius of who he is, he recognizes all these things.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
He got.
Whereas some guys couldn't even conceive of that. Yeah. The concept of being bold, needing to be bold. That's Washington right there.
Yeah.
Many of the others, they would have never even thought that way.
Because really, it's kind of a minor skirmish, really.
Well, it is. It is. Because he deliberately saw. Yeah, because he knows it's not that many.
He understood, I don't need a big win. I just need a win. I need something to hang belief on.
Yes, hang belief on and fill their bellies while I do it.
Yeah.
That's right.
Because you cannot underestimate that.
And it was all him, because the idea behind it and the planning was all Washington.
Yes,
right. and but not that many with serious opposition in certain points. Gates wanted nothing to do with it.
Oh yeah.
Well, yes, because it's insane.
Right.
It's an insane proposition that you're going to cross a nearly frozen river. The paintings of Washington crossing the Delaware. It's not frozen because obviously you don't cross a frozen river in boats, but it is. It's nearly there. It is going to freeze over anytime.
It's freaking
now.
Tiny boats and. Could have easily been swamped. They could have all.
They essentially stole every boat for miles around, and it was the marble headers is what they called them. The guys that were used to doing this.
Yes,
they were in command of the crossing.
So they get over there, and of course, the British are not right on the banks of the river, which is honestly a bit of a mistake on their part.
Yeah,
because they left it themselves wide open. They had a few outposts. But it's Christmas.
Yeah,
that's right. So, and they know they're presuming on the custom to save them that we just don't campaign in the winter time. Right. We're going to go over here where there's nice houses in Trenton and have us a Christmas party.
Yes, we're gonna have a party. We're gonna eat. We're gonna be warm. We're gonna be safe.
And the legend of the Hessians were drunk is not.
No, not as a general rule. They were not. No, they were.
They were taken by surprise.
Yeah. Well, absolutely, but it was day after Christmas.
Exactly.
They're expecting. They just custom is what did them in.
Well, and nobody in his right mind would have done what Washington did.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why I think this is so pivotal
and so brilliant,
and so brilliant because one of the things we gloss over. This was so brilliantly planned, but also brilliantly executed. He has put the people in place to execute this.
Yeah.
And Hamilton plays no small part in this. It's one of his first major leadership roles.
That's right.
Yeah.
He's key to taking out the Hessians.
That's right.
Yeah.
And he gives that to an untried young man.
Yeah.
That is brilliant.
So,
because it worked.
Yeah.
But also, the Americans don't lose anybody in this raid.
No.
Not a single casualty.
That's exactly
right. And they take the entire garrison. And then they go on
to Princeton.
No. They go on after that. They're still in New Jersey. If it's not Newark, it's one of the other major cities that we would know as a major city today. And they attack again and win again. Princeton. So basically, they get rid of all the pressure in the north.
That's right.
In two or 3 weeks.
Yeah, Trenton and Princeton are two.
Princeton, that's what
I did say that.
Yes. And so, with a limited number of men, in a bold, brilliant stroke of military genius.
Hal wasn't even there. He'd gone back to New York.
Yeah.
I mean, and because that's, again, he's taken this custom, which he knows so well, and uses it to his advantage. And this is not, and we don't want to minimize the fact that the Hessians were they were scary. They were very good. That's exactly the words I was looking for. Johann Rall, who was in command at Trenton, was fearsome. He knew his stuff.
They didn't play.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't play around.
Hessians don't play.
That's right.
That's
they were amazingly elite. You're going against the Green Berets of the time,
right?
And you caught them off guard, but you still whooped their ass.
You did, yeah.
And that's I'm glad we're spending time on Trenton because I think it deserves.
Robert, I really appreciate you bringing that because it is a window into so many of Washington's skills. Mm-hmm. Again, this idea I need something to hang belief on.
That's right. To even think that way.
Yeah, to think that way.
That's the strategist in him.
Yeah, to think
that most commanding generals never even think about
this big picture way, but at the same time, do all the details himself and planned it all out and made it work.
Well, didn't really have anybody else.
I was going to say, this is a time when there are no general staffs. Even the Germans don't have a general staff yet, and that's where we get the idea. That's 100 years away.
That's right, yeah.
So, I mean, they may have guys that's like, okay, I want you to make sure, Henry, that we've got ammunition for the cannon. Over here, I want you to make sure that that we've got some food for the guys.
Yeah, because that was a huge part of it was the artillery, and he planned all that out.
And that's right. And Knox was a genius in and of himself too.
Yes.
He did have. I don't want to minimize. He did have great people with him. That time.
Yeah.
We talk about this is all his planning. Yes, it was, but he also did not plan this totally on his own and say, all right, here's everything we're going to do, boys.
Yeah.
And here are your assignments. There was still. Because this is a time when you had war councils. We see this in the Civil War as well, and they got together. They figured out what they were going to do, but Washington lays out, "This is what we're going to do.
Yeah,
let's figure out the how.
Yeah,
and who's going to get the boats? Who's going to all that details?
And he was able to take locally, and that's another strength that the British did not have. Washington had people with him who knew the ground, who knew the American. The guy that was in charge, and I cannot remember his name, the Marbleheader, who was the fisherman from there. He was in command of the crossing, as it showed in that movie. Yeah. He's the one that created all the system that got them across there in the time that they needed to.
Well, again, that's Washington recognizing
the talent and strengths of the people against him, which is a very American idea.
Yes,
that the British didn't think that way.
Yes, the British did have help, obviously, especially early on, because we thought we were British. We thought of ourselves as British citizens.
Sure.
And so there were many who did not want to revolt against the king. So but they didn't use those people in the same way. They were still looked down upon as the colonials.
Yeah.
And so, again, and I think ultimately that's one of the reasons why probably by the end of the war, there were very few Tories left.
The loyalists all left. Even
those who would have tended to be loyalists at the beginning, would have converted by the end. Because
most did. That's correct. They realized,
just an expediency thing. It's like, you know what? They're here supposedly to protect us, but damn, they suck at it.
Yeah. Well, we've grown beyond them. Yeah. In many respects, that's we have our national character has come to the point that we're slightly different, just enough.
And that's a great phrase. I think. We don't normally talk about that in terms of the revolution. But even though I think that is the thing that makes the 13 colonies stand together, is that there is a national character.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we've got all these slave states in the South, and we've got these more urban and not quite industrial,
but mercantile.
Yeah. In the North, and then of course on the frontier, we've got all these people who are just like all the ones who came to America in the beginning, trying to get away from all you city fellers.
The wilderness birthed the American character in many ways.
Yeah.
Yes.
And over the time, the taming of that wilderness and
the fortitude and the foresight.
That's right, which was necessary in order to survive. That's correct. It's very Darwinian in some ways, but it changed us.
Once you have that. The people who survive it.
That's right.
They're going to have that attitude that, you know what? We can do anything.
Yeah, exactly. We can
do whatever we set our minds to.
What hasn't killed us will make us stronger.
I was going to say, you went to the Nietzsche before I could get there. That's right. That's exactly it.
So, Mark, I don't want to take over your cabin, but I got to ask, what are those two things?
Right, I want to get there. But I love what you brought up, but now it's time for those two things. So I'm going to do one of them that I don't think you all are guessing first. So this is a presidency one.
Okay.
So there is this kind of conflict over the assumption of debt.
Yes.
Some of the states, Virginia, the more well-off states, have paid off the debts from the war because a lot of states took on debts independently of the country.
Right.
The Continental Congress took on debts. Franklin, Jefferson, they were instrumental in getting those loans from Europe.
Yeah, France in particular.
But states did too on their own. And so there's this crisis over what do we do about that. Hamilton's position is we need to assume those war debts from the individual states. This is, again, post-Constitution, post the idea of we're a single nation. But the states who had paid their debts are like, why should we have to pay South Carolina and Georgia's debts? Then the other position is, or the other question is, what are we going to do about a capital? Are we going to leave it in New York? Or are we going to make it Philadelphia? Jefferson and the Virginia gang said, no, we want the capital to be in Virginia. Washington gets everybody together in these meetings, and he doesn't really kind of take a real hard position, but he lets them all work out where, okay, we'll accept assumption if we get the capital. And it's this first idea of compromise.
Horse trading.
Can make this work. And
That's
he
right.
oversees that. He oversees meshing Hamilton's position with Jefferson's.
Brilliantly so.
And makes it work. And then
that's a really great point.
Yeah,
you get DC.
It's what we call today the win-win scenario. Everybody gets something they want. Nobody gets everything they want, but everybody gets something they want.
And you'd think, well, of course that makes so much sense. But Washington's the guy that oversees that.
Because he deliberately goes in without a position. Stated,
Well,
anyway. I mean, stated. Public.
But he wants the capital in Virginia.
Yeah.
He does too.
Yeah.
But he's willing to let them horse trade this out and figure it out.
Well, Virginia and many of the southern states, because of the wealth, really do wield quite a bit of power.
Virginia
especially. If Virginia had decided to not participate, there would be no revolution.
Yeah.
Just as if Virginia had decided to not participate, there would not have been a civil war as we know it.
Yeah.
Very interesting on that, but that's another what if we can talk about.
Yeah.
Well, New York could say the same thing.
Yes.
You could say Pennsylvania, perhaps. But very few colonies had that heft.
But you know what? We could probably have done it without New York. Maybe not Pennsylvania.
No. A good argument for another day.
Yeah. But Virginia, no way.
Yeah.
Partially because even if we had won, without the Virginians, we would not have crafted the Constitution that we have.
Well, that's a little bit of a hindsight to that. But.
Yes. But the other piece of this, too, is Congress isn't really involved yet. But that's where all this is going to have to go. Congress is going to have to play along with this deal that they've made.
Yeah. Ultimately, that's true because they're going to vote on it.
Because they can't do it by... All of this is got to be congressional stuff.
Well, yeah.
But they make this arrangement, and then they're able to go to their allies in Congress and say, look, me and Jefferson, we've got this deal. The president's on board. Let's vote for it.
Well, more
and Jefferson's
importantly,
able to go, Hamilton's on board.
That is the ultimate working of the system as it's designed
actually,
to be.
let's make a distinction here, because we have to remember, the system was different than it is today.
Yes.
Because the senators were appointed by the states directly. So if the states decide, this is what we want to do, the senators are pretty much going to go along because the senators are going to be out of a job.
Yeah,
because they just won't get reappointed.
Yeah, they're
this
beholden.
is very much a, you could have just been paralyzed.
Yes,
Washington could have just said, well, without Congress, we don't have any idea what to do. But he got these guys to make a deal, go to Congress, and get the deal done.
Yeah, it was a recognition and really, this continues today.
Yeah,
yes,
really
exactly. When it's done as it's intended to do.
This idea of navigating executive versus legislative and coming up with something.
Well, it's building coalitions.
Yeah,
and not. And I don't even like that word because it implies there's divisions out there. But it's building consensus. There were. There always will be.
Real.
Sure,
Yeah,
absolutely,
yeah.
And there always have been. But it's a consensus building that you get.
Yeah.
Is probably the better word.
He did it.
He created. This is the right thing to do, folks. Let's come on board, and we'll make sure everybody comes along with us. That's leadership, folks.
Yes,
and that's one of the things you're talking about.
He hated sectionalism. He wanted all the sections of the country to work together to really forge one identity.
Because we all benefit by that.
Piece of it.
Everyone benefits by that.
That is that I think is one of the reasons why he is my number one choice for the greatest president.
Yeah.
Absolutely, hands down, is that he had both the idealism and the practical mastered.
Yeah,
because it's very much a Roman view of things. Here's the ideal.
Yep.
We're going to shoot for it. We're probably going to fall short, but we'll work with that as best as we can.
Yeah,
that's
and the pragmatism meshed with an idealism is America's
That's what I've been
strength,
trying to figure out. Pragmatism and idealism together. Yes. Wow, what a concept.
That's always the way America works best, when you can merge an ideal with a
positive idealism.
Stuff. Yeah,
because I want to point out why this is, because some people think, well, Nazi Germany had ideals and they were very pragmatic.
They were shitty about,
but their ideals were evil.
Yeah. Well, yes, but they were flawed. They were fatally flawed.
They were evil beyond compare. So movements that have an impact on history are always going to marry an ideal of some kind, whether good or bad, with a pragmatism. Very rarely, and I think that's far more common, but very rarely do we have, again, to use that word Francis liked, that confluence of a positive ideal for the benefit of as many as possible with that same pragmatism.
Right.
And it's not just, and this is one of the things that just fascinates me about the founding of our country. It's not just Washington. It's not just a Jefferson or an Adams or a Hamilton. There are so many men that are involved in this that, we just can't name all of them, but they were all committed to this.
Yeah, they
at least
really
to one degree or another.
They subsumed their own ambitions into the idea we can make something that's unlike anything else, and it'll work.
They channeled their ambitions into that.
That's right. Idealism kind of took a superior position to pragmatism. And that I don't want to put them oppositional.
Yes and no.
I don't want to put them oppositional. I really don't.
Right? No, because they're not. I mean, they're not. They really.
They were really hand in glove.
Yeah, and Washington's the guy that made a mesh more than anyone else.
Well, effectively, that's right. If you want to speak effectively, that's correct. Because Jefferson did too. Adams did too. But none. They were still poor shadows.
Poor shadows.
But off of Washington's model.
Well, that's exactly it. That's correct. They recognized, hey, this can be done and be done well. Let's do some more of that. Yeah. They were giants. They were geniuses, but they were not. They still pale compared to the guy, and that's kind of what we're talking about.
I feel strongly about that.
Well, everybody does. Yeah,
and one of the things
great, but he's Washington's shadow.
That's correct.
One of the things that is really I find amazing is that Washington doesn't get the. I think it's more so than it used to be. At least I'm aware of it more so. Maybe that's the only difference. But he does not get the credit for the Constitution that he should. Yeah. We call Madison the father of the Constitution.
Yeah.
And perhaps rightly so. But I think Washington also is just as deserving.
He's the godfather.
Yeah, if Madison's the father, he's at least the godfather.
Because if Washington had frowned upon anything Madison's putting in, they'd have rethought it.
Yeah,
they wanted his approval,
and I think he had a lot to do with more so than perhaps the debates and the records of the debates would show. But I think his influence is far greater there.
That was very deliberate too.
Yeah,
they wanted to insulate him a little bit in the written record.
Well, and honestly, I have to think that a lot of people went into that thinking, all right, we're going to put him as the actually they called him the president of the convention.
Yes.
And very quickly, I'm sure that many of the people who are in there are thinking, well, we've already decided who the first president's going to be because who else are we going to choose?
That's right.
After this.
That's right.
Yeah. They wanted his imprimatur
Imprimatur.
You say it. You pronounce it better, Francis.
Imprimatur.
Yes. Imprimatur.
That's right.
They wanted that, but they also knew if they got that, they could sell it, and they knew that he would think it through too. He wouldn't just give it away.
Right.
So here's the second episode that I want to point out, and I'm sure this is the one you guys are thinking of.
Okay.
And then we'll wrap up the episode because I've been smelling chili all morning. Robert's made us chili, and
Tis almost time.
Yes, I'm anxious to start.
It's been cooking since about 10 o'clock last night.
Oof, so it's going to be great.
Yes.
The second episode, of course, is the officers after the war have not been paid.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
okay.
Yes, I was aware. I knew this was coming.
There's letters going around, and there's a lot of talk of these officers are going to get together, have a meeting, and then they're going to march on Congress. And who knows how that's going to come out.
Right.
You know, we're
really talking insurrection? That's an insurrection.
That's where we are. Yeah, that's where we're at.
The idea of we're going to go shoot all these Congress MFers until we get paid. I mean, there was a real danger of this could have devolved into military dictatorship.
Which essentially is anarchy.
I think that's the exact opposite of anarchy.
Well, yes. On the street, you're right. But long term, it was anarchy.
I mean, it would have been a failure.
Well, it would have killed the experiment.
Yes.
It would have absolutely killed it.
That's right, because nobody would have ever taken anything seriously after that.
Right.
Yeah.
We reacted against that.
Yeah, all the ideals expressed in the Declaration and everything they felt like they fought for is now gone. Mm-hmm. So Washington
we proved ourselves savages at the base.
Yeah, and so Washington's invited to the meeting.
That's their first mistake.
It's
ultimately their salvation. Their salvation.
I mean,
that's
right.
For those that want to march on Congress, it's a mistake.
Right.
But
Horatio Gates was in charge of that, by the way.
And it shows Gates as a myopic doof.
Well, I was going to say, insult him some more, sir, because I think he deserves as much.
Yeah.
Saratoga aside, this man here was possibly one of the individuals, along with Charles Lee, as many historians have said, things would have been much, much better if they had been shot in the head early.
Yeah. If they had been
That's interesting, because Gates has a fairly decent reputation, generally speaking.
Well, Saratoga overwhelms a lot of stuff. He was brilliant then, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But of course, I can't get out of my mind him fleeing the state when Cornwallis arrives in Virginia, and Washington says to Nathaniel Greene, "Oh, by the way, I need to send you down there." And he goes, "What?" And yet he saves the nation in many ways. Yeah. Greene is one of my heroes, and Gates is definitely one of the most vile individuals.
Yeah, Gates is real odd. As much as he contributed to our eventual success, he never understood how to translate that then into belief and the future.
Very small-minded.
Myopic, just super myopic.
Well, you know what?
And self-serving at times too.
I'm hesitant to use such words because I try to keep in mind, just as we push back against those who want to say that Washington and Jefferson were evil men because they had slaves.
Yeah,
we should be careful about saying, well, Gates was myopic and he was really bad at this, that, and it's just Saratoga. That he is a product of his times.
Yeah.
And it's, he is only a poor man because we have the giant.
Yeah.
That Washington is.
As a poor reflection of
Washington. Interesting.
I mean, not only, because yes, he did flee Virginia.
Yeah, and he was...
And yes, he wants to march on, but that's also partially because he's not one of the few men. I talk about how, all these unnamed men who were instrumental. Yes, there's a lot, and I couldn't possibly name all of them, and probably many of them have been lost to history, generally speaking. But it's still a relatively small percentage of the overall population. Gates just isn't one of that percentage. Yeah. And I don't think he necessarily acted any differently than many would have done.
So perhaps I should get to know him a little bit better.
Well, I just think there should be an allowance for...
Not everybody can be Washington.
Not everybody is Washington.
I think that's what you're saying. Yeah, you're right. A weaker man, they were inevitable.
Well, certainly, how is he any different than many who followed?
But he also thought of himself as better than Washington too.
Oh, he did. See, that's where I'm kind of going back to.
That's kind of part of the difference.
That's the issue.
Between like a Hamilton. Hamilton didn't think he was better than Washington.
Well, Hamilton was young. He was Washington's protege. He hero worshipped Washington.
Yeah, he was his mentor. And Gates thought he should have been in charge. He thought his shit didn't stink.
Thank you for using that. That's my favorite.
Yeah, so it's kind of the thing that it's Gates himself that I have the issue with.
Right. And I'm not trying to defend
I know you're not,
his actions, but I just think it's important to remember that, in the circumstances that we're talking about, just about anybody would have done what he did.
If not him, then someone else.
Right.
Yeah,
it
he
takes
just happened to have the authority.
That is Washington to be able to stop it.
Which brings us back to Martin, which I want to make sure we get back to.
Yes, I want to make sure we
because we haven't told the story. We've teased.
Right. That's why I'm starting to bring it back to.
So the officers are having a meeting. There's a lot of letters and scuttlebutt going back and forth about we're going to march on Congress and get paid. They invite Washington. There's a little bit of a setup because there's still people that believe in him in this group. And again, this is all pre-Constitution.
But it's post-war,
it's
essentially.
post-war,
yeah.
but
it's Articles of Confederacy.
Yeah, right. The war is won.
That middle ground time. So Washington goes to the front of the room, and he has something he wants to read to the group. And he says, "Let me get my spectacles, for I have not only grown gray,
I have grown
but
gray
nearly,
in your service.
Yeah, but nearly blind in your service."
Yes.
And he reads a letter saying, "We need to not do this. I know you want to get paid, but let's give the civilian authorities a chance. Let's give Congress a chance. They know they need to pay us. It'll get figured out, but we need to not do this."
Yeah, and the moment, of course, is when he says those words, and they realize, because they've all been with him along the way.
Everybody's sacrificing. I know you haven't gotten paid. That's a sacrifice. But I'm not only gray, but nearly blind.
That's right.
And
I have sacrificed as much or even more than you.
I was there
I'm
with you.
And this is the ultimate bonding of those soldiers who have basically survived to give everything. And
they would have marched if he had asked them to, and because he asks them not to, they don't.
That's
essentially what it boils down to.
That's exactly it, and it is the ultimate imprimatur moment, snapshot of that leadership quality that only Washington had.
Yeah, endorsing civilian rule, and that the military subservient to the duly elected representatives of the people.
See, that's Washington's genius.
He saves
because he takes the leadership that he has, which he could use either way. But he allows his ideals to both temper and direct his leadership accordingly. And that's his genius.
Yeah. And getting others to come with him in that same
because they would have done it. Whatever
he saves the experiment.
Whatever he said, they would have done if he did it right. Absolutely. And that's just the way he was.
Yeah.
But he recognized that he's willing to go against the popular tide, but do so in such a way that's effective.
Yeah.
They all break out in tears when he says those words, and they are his. They are completely enraptured by what he has to say, and they have followed him, and they will continue to follow him.
Yeah.
And it shows that leadership is not always the highest ideal to which one can aspire. In fact, leadership must be subservient to greater ideals.
Yeah.
And Washington shows that very well.
Well, leadership as the thing sought is nothing more than narcissism.
Well, yeah, that's correct. Hitler was a great leader. He mobilized millions. Yes. That's correct.
Yes,
but his fatal flaw was the ideals that fueled that leadership quality, which he undoubtedly had.
Bella Oxmix. He had to be the unity.
That's right. I love that. I still love that.
So again, it's this notion of leaving the stage. That there's
let's end with that. Yeah,
there's something bigger than just me,
and it's not just leaving the stage. But leaving the stage at a time when he was still relatively hale and fit.
Yes, he could have served a third term without any issue.
Now, granted, he dies, I think, in 1799.
Yes, he does, but that's somewhat related to the circumstances he was at. out on a horse and
yes,
he
yes.
gets
That's
ill.
That's what I'm
It's a
getting at.
circumstance. If he'd been president, he probably wouldn't have experienced.
Probably would not have happened.
That's
but,
right.
You know, basically living on a plantation, your life expectancy is not going nearly as high as it is if you're sitting in the White House, oddly enough, even though that's a very stressful job, just because of the things you have to deal with. You know, you get thrown from a horse, you get kicked by a mule, whatever. Yeah. You get pneumonia.
That's exactly it, yeah.
You know? But...
Hey, has anybody seen my coat?
Has anybody seen my coat?
William Henry Harrison, March 4th, 1836.
Yes.
Or no, 1841.
1841, yeah. So, you know... He leaves at a time when... Because he is still fit and hale enough to be called back to military service. This is unheard... I mean, think about that. Yeah. Think about any one of our... Can you think of Grant being called back to service after he leaves the presidency? Well, granted, he was too fat, but, you know...
Well, I mean, he was... I mean, he's one of the others. You know, we speak of great Americans that we needed when we needed them.
And we've done Grant.
And we've done Grant. I don't want to belabor that point, but I'm thinking he is probably the other marble man. Lincoln is also one of those marble men. There are few.
There are very few.
There are very few.
Well, and they are marble men almost entirely because they are the right men at the right place in the most crucial points in history.
And yet they operate out of an idealism.
I don't know that Grant operates out of an idealism so much as it is that he was just very good at what he did.
He's more than just an efficient guy.
He has an inherited idealism.
But that's okay.
And he recognized
all idealism is ultimately inherited.
And he wanted to continue Lincoln's legacy. That's his
idealism. Yes, once he becomes president, yes.
That's right. He is an ideal.
Continuing what he fought for.
But realistically, though, he's not the guy we needed when we needed him, where we needed him as president. It was as general. And that's what I'm talking about.
Perhaps, but I will
because
say
he did not need to be president to cement his
legacy. He would have still been. We would have still revered him whether he was president or not.
And as a matter of fact, I think his presidency tarnishes his reputation.
But he was one.
Not a lot, but it does.
Yeah, there's a uniqueness to his position in history on that. Is because he was the only one.
Yes,
that could have unified both sides.
Yeah, well, I don't know that.
I know that the South was, question of unification of the South.
He's the only one that I think could have won from the North, because obviously we're not electing a Southern president anytime soon. While still one of the few, let's say, the only one we know of for sure, because
he's the last one standing.
He's the last one standing, but he is essential as president in that he tried to keep Reconstruction more along the lines of Lincoln.
See, there's the idealism again. He knows what's right and what's not, is able to...
I still think it's a different thing.
It is. As president, I do think he's the right man at the right moment as president. Nobody else could have done as much as he did do.
Which was an essentially impossible job. Yeah. That's correct.
I will grant you that.
He was the only one...
Yes, I'll allow it.
I was going to say, change that word. Yes.
I think he is the only one who could have gotten as much buy-in from the South as he did. Even though the buy-in wasn't complete, nobody else gets anywhere close.
Yes.
I mean, Sherman certainly wouldn't have.
Yeah, no, Sherman would...
but he was not electable. The gallantry, the ideals that he would put forward at the end of the war in Lincoln's shadow.
That's right. Well, his behavior at Appomattox was very...
Yes, that's exactly...
Oh, man, we're just on the fire here. That shows exactly the Grant that was necessary.
When asked for terms, and whenever they are unconditional, they are never punitive.
Very true. Yeah. That's right. Yes.
So there is that. So whether you want to say it's idealism that drives it, which...
There's some truth to that, I think.
I don't know that it's as big as part of it as his practicality, in the sense that, well, first of all, I can't be punitive with my terms because I need to move on to the next fight. And if I am punitive, that means I got to take all these guys prisoners, I got to send them someplace, I got to get them fed and housed, and that's going to delay me, and I need to move on to the next fight.
So his efficiency and his practicality were functions of, I think, maybe here's the better word, instead of idealism, strategic thinking. Because he's absolutely thinking strategically. He's thinking 15 moves ahead.
Yes. And to me,
and that's genius.
The idealism is not necessarily even his. You said it's inherited. It's inherited partially as, well, he's an American. And these are the things that...
My God.
But on the other hand, his inheritance comes probably more from Lincoln specifically.
Yeah.
Because Lincoln has said the goal is to preserve the Union.
Again,
that's the important part.
That's the strategic abilities of Grant. He knows
that's his goal.
Yeah.
That becomes Grant's goal. And that's why he is... If you want to say he's idealistic, then yes, because he's following what Lincoln set out. Both in the military and then as president.
That's right.
He's
a continuation of Lincoln.
The Union.
He's doing his best to be a continuation of
Lincoln.
Lincoln.
So let me give one
let's get back to Washington.
Little piece about that, and we'll wrap up the episode because we're at 80 plus minutes.
Oh, wow.
I think Lincoln doesn't get enough credit for evolving over time as president.
Agreed.
That's a very fair
thing. That's right, because people will judge his 1850s stuff as to the 1863 stuff. They're not even close.
He evolves because of his experiences as the war leader in the White House, and I think
his exposure to men like Douglas.
Yes,
absolutely,
and the willingness to be exposed.
Yes,
that's right. Again,
because you talk about Marble again. Lincoln is 1B after Washington's 1A. I think Grant, again, is open to being inspired by the transformation of Lincoln and internalizes these things and again wants to become that extension of Lincoln.
He allows the national
I want to give Grant more credit than just being a great strategic thinker. Yes, but I think as president, he becomes inspired to do things.
He allows the transformation that was taking place in the nation at the time, violently, of course, but nevertheless is still a transformation. He subsumes that. He absorbs that. He makes that part of his personal person. Sorry to be redundant, but it's all about he comes out a different person because of the experiences he went through, same as Lincoln did.
Yeah.
And that's essentially...
I think Grant's exposure to Lincoln transforms him
it's a
from
push forward.
That Galena loser that he was to this aimless, I don't know what I'm going to do, I'm just going to work in Dad's saddle shop, to president. It's not a
and it's not just
it's not a thing that he just did.
And it's not just the war that changed that.
Right.
It's not just Donelson
Lincoln.
And Shiloh and Chattanooga. It's all of that. Because those were essentially his own thing. It's once he comes back to Washington as commander-in-chief that the Lincoln influence becomes preeminent. And from the Wilderness forward, he's a very different general.
Well, how so?
Not on the field, but by his ideal, a different man.
Correct. Yeah, I was saying it's a different general. I don't see the difference in the general.
Well, there was a little of that because he was driven. Somewhat of it was reactionary to the guys that went before him, and he recognized that we're moving forward.
Well, but I think that's always been. That's why I say
that was him.
Even his unconditional terms.
That's why he got appointed, mind you, because he does not.
Because even his unconditional terms are not punitive for that reason. But the reason the terms are unconditional is like, well, you lost.
I love that. That is so brilliant. It's exactly right. But you lost. I mean, what do you expect?
Yeah. But I think a lot of what you guys are talking about, I see less as necessarily the exposure to Lincoln as it is the experience, because I think it is a war experience.
I'm thinking
that
so
furthers
too.
the ideal. Yeah. So maybe it makes the ideal that Lincoln has set out to preserve the Union. That's a great concept.
Yeah.
Grant has specific experience of the Union in many ways, much like Washington, in that he is in the mud, he is in the arena with his men. He sees both the winners and the losers, and they're the same people. I mean, one side fought for a horrendous thing, but honestly, most of the guys in the trenches, they probably could have cared less. I mean, they did care because it's
dividing.
In terms of, well, you are upsetting my way of life in one form or another, but most of them weren't slave owners.
Yeah.
Well,
but they were men, and that humanity that is being destroyed. I think that when he sees that, can't help but change how he looks at how the presidency is going to work.
I think Vicksburg has a lot to do with it. It's very endemic about with the surrender of Vicksburg. Basically, how when his opponent Breckinridge comes to him and Pemberton. Excuse me, I'm moving back. Pemberton comes to him and says, "Well, yeah, we're going to leave with all our slaves." He says, "No, you're not." And that's when we realized that it's one of those moments, one of those teensy little moments that recognizes, no, we're not doing that anymore. It's like Lincoln in the movie, The 13th Amendment. No, we're not doing that anymore. We're not negotiating that back. We're not walking that back.
Right, because saving the definition of saving the Union has been transformed into the only way to save the Union is to get rid of slavery.
That's right.
Slavery.
Ending the institution of slavery.
I think Lincoln gets there first, and Grant gets there as a reflection of Lincoln.
That's right. But of course, by Vicksburg, it's the time. He's recognized.
We're 2 years into it, and everybody realizes by this point it's not states' rights. It's states' right to own a frickin' slave.
Yeah, from Shiloh to Vicksburg is a transformative moment, I think, for Grant.
Yes.
How the hell did we get to Grant from Washington?
That's my fault. I mentioned Grant is...
And I ran with it.
We're at 90 minutes, and we muddled in Lincoln and Grant and Washington, but we'll just... Again,
it's all the American experience, Joe.
Yes, we'll stress that we're starting off a launch of a series here on the Revolution.
Yes.
The Revolution! And what better place to start on that than with Washington? Yes. And I think, listeners, you've got a sense of the reverence for which we hold the first president.
That's right. And again, rightfully so. That's right. Most people still deserve that. Most people still revere him in many ways. They recognize, even with all his flaws and his systemic issues, his character is still admirable.
Yeah, I mean, we went through a period of Washington is just a series of stories, the cherry trees and teeth and all that.
Oh yes, that's very much our childhood history lesson.
that we didn't get, that really had nothing to do with anything.
Well, I think we deconstructed him and then rebuilt him, not any more or less accurately, but we've internalized him.
Yeah,
and I think we should. All of us should.
You know, the modern world is, of course, we have to take everybody that was important and knock them down because everything's horrible, and we need to, whatever.
Yeah, we need to burn it all down.
Cultural relativism and burn everything down, and Marxism and blah blah blah.
Washington still tends to survive that, though.
Well,
I think he, unlike Jefferson,
I think he survives it because people who want to do that are ignoring him. They're like, oh, well, we've already taken care of that. Now let's go attack somebody else.
I think it's Jefferson is very much attacked, and Washington less so.
Well, I think it's because they haven't gotten to him like they have Jefferson.
Yeah,
Jefferson has a lot of things that are way more difficult and problematic.
Yeah, I mean, again, Washington had the discretion sometimes to not write things down, and Jefferson didn't.
Yes, you can make that argument.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes. A lot of things came out of Jefferson's head to paper that probably shouldn't have. And again, I'm not a big Jefferson fan. He worked really hard during Washington's second term to undermine him.
He did, yes.
He paid people to write all kinds of
politics were, oddly enough, nastier then than they are now.
It was super nasty. And it was nasty about proxy.
What?
So,
that's impossible.
Here, as captain, I'm calling a halt.
Thank you.
We're too far in. Because we could do this all day, because we do love the man.
I do this all day.
Thank you, Steve Rogers. That's right.
Yes,
it's one of our favorite lines.
So, listeners, learn for yourself. Don't just take our word for it. Don't just take the word of somebody who's trying to knock Washington down. Read up on him. I think you'll come to the same conclusion.
He really is worth learning.
We did. Yes. He is a historical personage that is a titan of human history, a paragon that without him, there is no American experiment.
Nope.
A lot of people contribute. Again, Jefferson does. Franklin's important. We've talked about Franklin at length. I love him too. Washington's the guy that smushed all this together and combined the idealism with pragmatism and made it work at the level of being a general and a military leader, but also a civilian leader later.
Well said, sir.
And walked off the stage like Cincinnatus back to the plow. Literally.
That's right, which is what we're about to do right now.
Yes. Let's go eat some chili.
Figuratively, anyways.
And Francis, what's next, buddy?
Well, we're not finished. We're really never finished with any of this sort of stuff. We're going Code of Honor next time. So we're going to talk about a lot of the... And I'm not sure if we're going to stick with Washington quotes because they are
so... Oh, yes, we are.
That's right.
I'm the captain.
Yes, right, we are. Okay, that's right. Which we should, because Washington was eminently quotable in many ways. And we've not done a lot. I don't know if we've ever done a Washington quote.
No.
So we're going to go deep with his words themselves and try and just go a little deeper with this marble man, as I've been using that term a lot, to talk a little bit about him and get to know him in with his own words. So you're going to love it, folks. Be here.
Hope you enjoyed another pointless discussion of eternal questions. Remember, new episodes drop every second and fourth Friday at 6 a.m. Eastern.
Spread the word. We're on all the major podcast platforms. And leave us a review. That helps others find us.
We're on Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website, snakesandotters.com.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Join us next time.